Hello and welcome to part 4 of my mini hospital series, where in the past few parts I talked about the cancer diagnosis that I got from obviously the NHS, why I didn't choose to go with their recommended surgery, my research, the protocol that I built, and then obviously finally the unexpected stay in hospital with suspected stroke symptoms that actually turned out to be neurotoxicity caused by primarily a high dose of EGCG, which is the green tea extract, and that's how that interacted with sort of higher doses, not high, but middling doses of ivermectin, which is obviously the off-label antiparasitic that many people are talking about in oncological circles around the world about the potential positive effects that it can have on treating or shrinking cancer tumours. So first off, just to give the regular, I'm not a doctor. I'm not offering any advice on what you should or shouldn't do. This is my story about the research that I've done, the protocol that I've built, and ultimately one of the side effects that I had as a result of basically overdoing it, taking things too far, too fast, and not having enough precautions in place to prevent A&E visits in ambulances and spending nearly a week on a stroke ward in the local hospital, which potentially all could have been avoided. But when you're kind of pushing limits on what you're trying to do without sort of full professional help and monitoring, it's sometimes it's difficult to know, what exactly to watch for and to understand the full implication of everything you're doing. So one of the biggest things I would say that's changed between before and after the hospital visit is a little bit of mindset, I suppose, how I think about protocol, because whilst I was talking with people about what I was doing, why I was doing it, sharing my research, etc., obviously I was looking up the downsides of each of the drugs. So what are the potential side effects? What is the long-term, the health benefits or deficits that any higher doses, therapeutic doses, could cause? And whilst I knew that, for example, ivermectin had the potential to cause neurotoxicity in terms of a little bit of dizziness, getting a little bit clumsy, sort of maybe, on really high doses, you could potentially have loss of stability, so losing your balance and things like that as well. And then obviously the build up of toxicity in the organs, is well discussed and talked about at various doses, and how to take breaks to allow those to flush away, because if you do get kidney damage, or if it does affect your liver in any way, those are reversible quite quickly. But the one thing that I really didn't give my full weight of attention to, and really it's almost having that sort of whole thing of being humble and taking maximum precautions, it really is something that I didn't give enough weight to, the neurotoxicity side of it, and really didn't fully appreciate that the effects first, that the onset could be so quick, but second, that it would affect short-term memory. Now, whilst I was aware that that was a possibility at high doses, and I didn't consider 160 milligrams, so it was 80 milligrams a day, split doses with lunch and evening meal. From what I'd read, the studies that I'd looked at, and what were considered high dose, I mean, there are studies that have trialed much higher doses of those, and they were all very much considered well tolerated and no major obstacles in terms of side effects. But that layered on top of the ketogenic diet and the high fat diet in particular, so I'm on a 70 to 75% high fat diet, that increases the effects of the ivermectin and the EGCG, and also the higher dose of EGCG. So I was taking 1 milligram tablets, but I was taking 2 a day, and I was taking them with the ivermectin. So now that I've found out that this whole idea of the EGCG having properties that allows it to transport properties of the ivermectin across the blood-brain barrier and increase the toxicity essentially in the brain of ivermectin, and also the high-fat diet helps with that process as well. Whilst I touched on each of those parts, I haven't really considered the full weight of combining all of those things together and just going at it sort of really, I suppose, quite hard. I mean, 80 milligrams of ivermectin and one gram of EGCG. When you just look at the dosages in terms of therapeutics, they're both quite reasonable. Now, maybe doing that twice a day, it's starting to, get towards the point where it's like these are pretty high doses. I mean, particularly on the EGCG, that's kind of more than the 800 milligrams to 1 gram that's mostly recommended, although trials have been done with higher doses. But really, when I started using those higher doses, I definitely should have put more safeguards in place. Now, one thing, because I hadn't considered the full effect of short-term memory loss, I wasn't using the big pill box. So I've got my week's worth of tablets in a pill box now. So they're not all in there, because there are the early morning and the evening ones I do take separately from those. But if I'm out and about, I can just chuck that in a bag and I can take them with me, and they're fine. And they do actually, what's quite good about this particular one, they're all separate colours, and each of the containers. So if I just want to take the Monday one out with me because I'm going to be out for the day, I've got my morning, lunchtime, evening. If I'm out for the day, they'll fit in my pocket. So perfect for that. But more importantly, if I take the tablets and my memory is affected, I can see that I've taken them. If I'm just taking them out of a dozen different sort of containers, and sort of all these are from my shelf, and if I'm just pouring these out of container one at a time at the various times as I was before, how am I going to know if I've taken them or not if my memory is affected? And that was one thing that I never considered. So that is really, really important. Talking with my partner as well, telling her what doses I'm taking. So now that I've literally, today is the first day that I'm changing the dosage of my ivermectin from 80 milligrams back up to 120 milligrams, single dose in the evening, but I'm keeping that separate from the EGCG, which I take earlier in the day, 6 hours before. And given that the EGCG has an effective half-life, it doesn't stay in the body for more than 4 to 6 hours, maybe 7 hours. It's relatively safe, I think, still to be able to take the higher doses of the ivermectin, but just away from the EGCG. So that's something that I really feel I can't stress enough, is that when you start increasing doses of various different supplements, that you don't just understand what the side effects are, what the warning signs could be, but you put safety mechanisms in place. So things like having a pill box. If I'm taking something in the order of 21, 22 different substances, but some of them are multiple tablets, so it's like 25 tablets a day. It's quite a few. It's not as much as some people are taking. I know from talking to people on the cancer aware groups, people have had much more than that. But for my protocol, I think it's around 25 tablets a day. It's 21, 22 different supplements and plus the off labels. But having a way to ensure that you're not accidentally double dosing, stuff like that, really important, because if your memory is affected, you forget that you've taken them. If you're doing them out of the bottles like I was, that could have been something that actually happened. I don't know. I don't remember. Short-term memory. I wasn't happy about it when I found out how badly I've been affected, because yes, okay, the 2 to 3 days I was on the high dose, clearly I was affected those days, but I think, just practically from day one, I was affected, but I didn't realize it. And the fact that I was able to hold a relatively normal conversation, but I just wasn't remembering them, or things that I was doing. And then ultimately, when it got to the higher levels of toxicity after like day 3 or 4, it really started to present symptoms physically of spilling things, being clumsy, knocking things over, losing my balance, all of those kinds of things. Even then, I clearly wasn't self-aware enough to ask Claire to take me to the hospital, or to help me get up to bed, sleep it off, stop taking the tablets. That just did not cross my mind, because from what Claire tells me, we didn't discuss it. And I don't know, like I say, because of the short-term memory loss, I don't know all of the things that went on during those days. She said, at one point I did get a little present. Now, I do stress it was at one point, and so I think it might have been towards the end, before the ambulance trip to A&E, but probably when I was spilling things, being clumsy and knocking things over and getting annoyed with myself, I would imagine. And, that translated into my communication with Claire. So, but if it had changed my behavior, and if I'd been getting more aggressive physically, I don't know what I would have done, because that's something that, again, because I can't remember anything that went on, I now have no kind of frame of reference. If it starts to happen again, I'm literally going to have to rely on Claire to tell me and make it clear that I'm being affected. And so I can't stress this enough, that if you're trying to do this all on your own, even though you're getting the support of your partner, because she fully supported everything I was doing, obviously buying the off labels, having to get those from abroad, getting loads of tablets, getting the whole keto diet. She's obviously helping with that, because she does most of the shopping. I do go out and do the occasional shop, but so she's helping with, also she understands what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, but I really wasn't upfront enough with the doses that I was taking and the potential side effects that could come about as a result of that. And in that respect, I was doing that on my own, which obviously hindsight is 2020 vision. Really, really bad idea, because when I was upping doses, if I'd have been telling her what I was doing, she could have said, "Oh, you're not right. You're not yourself. You're you're acting strangely, weirdly. You're saying silly things. Are you at the point where you should really back off on, whatever you've just increased the dosages on?" And that is something that, I don't know if I would have listened to or not. I really don't, because I can't remember, like I say, all of the steps that led up to that. But when you're an advocate of your own healthcare and you're doing things on your own because you can't get help from the NHS, if you've got the ability to get a professional on board, even if they're private and effectively not sanctioned by the whole kind of NHS insurance or whatever it might be, for doing checkups and making sure things are great, and even doing the bloods, which again, I was at the point where I was just about to get them checked when, of course, I was in hospital, so they did a load of tests anyway, but then I was off everything for a week anyway. So because nothing that I'm taking does damage that's not reversible short term, and by short term I mean weeks and months of taking them continually. If you take all of the drugs all of the time for 2 or 3 months and then just take a week off, any potential toxicity build-up, in all likelihood, as long as it's not affected your brain and your memory and all the other things, I mean, even then they'll go. But what I'm trying to say is, for your major organs, the toxicity will just dissipate by itself, and any kind of damage that may have been done in the short term will be almost instantly reversed, unless you're on super high doses of stuff, in which case you should be getting weekly checks of liver function, kidney function, anemia, white cell counts, etc. Anyway, but I'm in the therapeutic range for nearly everything that I'm doing, so I'm not at high risk. But you really do need to have kind of somebody in your corner to help you monitor what's going on, because whilst it's not something, I mean, the combination of what I'm taking, it's highly unlikely that anybody else is taking exactly the same as what I'm taking anywhere else in the world. I mean, they'll be similar, but they won't be the same, and they won't have my physiology either. And so I might be more susceptible to those high doses of EGCG and ivermectin, whereas other people might not. I don't know. Um, I don't have the facilities, the equipment, the available testing through NHS or otherwise to be able to run those kinds of tests, and I'm not even sure, if I did, whether they would be available or what I would be looking for. I mean, sure, I could get AI to potentially help me, but this is stuff that really, really doesn't show up as everyday kind of medical advice that you can pull out and extrapolate what's going to happen from what you're doing. So in terms of excuse me, in terms of doing your research and figuring out everything, that's all great. Do the pill boxes, titrate your medication, so build up to the higher doses. I've been doing it a week at a time since I've come out of the hospital, upping the doses and keeping an eye on things. I've obviously been keeping things separate that I know potentially could cause the problems again. And so my current goal really is to try and impact the tumour that I've got, which hopefully is still really, really tiny, whiny tumour. Very much hoping that that's the case. But my next exam I think is just over a week away now, and so I'll be able to give you an update as to whether or not what I've been doing in terms of all of the supplements, the pro-oxidative stress that I'm doing overnight, the antioxidants that I'm doing during the day, and sort of switching backwards and forth. My hope is that that's having an impact on the cancer, and at the very least holding it at bay, but more hopefully having an effect and actually killing off some of the tumour, even if it's not entirely at this point. Now, because I had a break, then went back onto the higher dose drugs for less than a week, and then I had another week off. Effectively, I've had, like, in the last month and a half of that time almost, I haven't been taking the full protocol properly. And obviously, while I was in hospital, I wasn't able to do the full keto diet properly either, because hospital food is the absolute worst food for cancer. I mean, there's carbs and sugars everywhere in the hospital diet, which I mean, look, I am not a doctor. I am not an oncologist. I'm not a scientist. I'm not anybody other than somebody who's done an awful lot of research over the past year. And if you've got cancer and you're going into hospital, you really want to try and get your food brought in. Do not trust the hospital to give you a diet that's going to help you keep cancer at bay. And this is all down to Professor Seyfried's work with the ketogenic diet: 70%, 70 to 75% fat, 20% protein, 5% or less carbs and sugars. Because literally what you're trying to do with your diet is starve the cancer of glucose. With all of the other things that I'm doing, there's probably 4 or 5 drugs in there that are trying to prevent the uptake of glutamine into cancer cells. And then I'm using ketone bodies for all my healthy cells, for my energy, for the ATP. And that's an absolutely integral part of it. So, I mean, one of the lessons that I've learned is if I ever go in hospital for anything again, it's like I would need to figure out a way to just basically get my food brought in. I'll skip breakfast, have a high fat lunch and high fat dinner, get two meals brought in a day, try and get all the calories up. Maybe I'll get a pot of cream or something that I can pour into my coffees or something. I don't know what I'll do, but even 6 days, and it was only sort of 5 days of hospital food really, was enough to completely throw me out of ketosis for that entire week. I'm certain. I'm almost positive that I was nowhere near a GKI of 2, and I certainly wasn't below it. And yeah, that's just something to be aware of if you're going into hospital and you're trying to use metabolic therapy to starve the cancer and attack it from the various different things. Hospital food ain't going to do it. And so, yeah, just another lesson learned, I would say, from this whole sort of hospital encounter. Now, the final thing I'll say before I sign off for this video is something that you probably want to have available, ready to hand, even if it's not something that you plan on sharing with anybody and everybody in the NHS, because, like I say, most people in the NHS, when it comes to cancer, metabolic therapy, off labels, and I'm specifically talking about the antiparasitics here, so ivermectin, fenbendazole, albendazole, mebendazole. I'm not sure if I said that or not, or fenbendazole. Yeah, but all of those essentially. Although some oncologists and many people have possibly have heard about it, because more and more people like me are trying it for themselves, because it's like, of all of the anecdotal stories out there, that people are being cured by this stuff, and it's not toxic, and it's, it doesn't destroy your immune system like, virtually every part of standard of care does. If you have chemotherapy, that destroys your immune system. If you have radiotherapy, that destroys your immune system. Even if you have surgery, it severely affects your immune system, because your immune system diverts all its attention to where you've been chopped into, and you've been cut open, things cut out. It's essentially, the immune system is on full alert for essentially, the not just the infections and things that come as a side effect of surgeries often, but the the whole wound healing thing is, it all has a massive impact. So the fact that there's the possibility that I could heal myself with no reduction in my standard of living. So, even if I was offered chemotherapy, radiotherapy, I wouldn't accept it, particularly partly because autoimmune condition makes it more risky anyway, which is why it's not a first choice, and surgery is their first choice. But I mean, the surgery also for me, massive, life altering for the rest of my life, completely changes everything. And it's like, well, look, there's plenty of people out there. There are becoming more and more stories, and whilst we have to treat them as anecdotal until we get the full protocols, until we get exactly what type of cancer they had, and whether or not they had any standard of care prior to going on to the metabolic therapy, what was their diet? Were they cutting out all the sugars and carbs? What was their dosing schedule? Were they just therapeutic? Were they really high dose? I mean, we don't know any of this for most stories that we hear about, which is really unfortunate, because if we knew more of what was curing people of stage 4 cancers, we'd have a much better idea of whether or not we can just sit in what are considered therapeutic levels, or whether or not we have to go into the potential higher toxicity levels of these drugs. And so I guess I would say, being your own healthcare advocate and essentially biohacking your own body to try and treat something as serious as cancer, have backup, get help, talk to people about what you're doing. Even if they don't fully support you, just ask them to watch out for changes that might indicate something is wrong. Get your protocol as fully researched as you can, and then do things like the pill pots, do things like talking to your partners, talking to friends. I mean, if you're not with your partner all day, we both work from home, so she sees me more than anybody else. But if I was at work, I'd go and find a trusted co-worker, a supervisor, a manager, and I would sit down with them and I'd just say, hey, look, this is what I'm doing. I'm a bit off the beaten track here. I need your help just to monitor what I'm doing. Obviously, if things go sideways, it could not only affect my work, but it could affect my health and how I interact with people and everything else. Now, with my current protocol, and I think I showed it in the last video, I showed the protocol, but this is the kind of the reworked version, and you can see that I've added more sections. So I've split out the early morning and late evening with the artemisinin, methylene blue and zinc. And so this is something that, if I share this with my partner, and if I ever have to go into hospital, I mean, that's something that she could just have in her email on her phone. And when the doctor says, do you know what he's taking? There it is. So that is something that I would say is probably quite important to try and lay it out in as good a way as you possibly can, such that it's easy to understand and people understand what it is you're trying to do. So I think that's everything that I was going to touch on today. Let me just check my notes. Oh, yeah. I didn't finish my point about communicating with NHS professionals. So one of the things that stopped me being in hospital for more than 6 days was the fact that because I'd done so much research and because I had a really good idea of what it was that caused my symptoms and why they wore off so quickly, and why when they started doing all the tests for me, because obviously they were testing me for stroke and stroke side effects, because it was neurotoxicity that presented similar, then once that wore off, I was effectively back to normal. If you don't know why you're affected, how you're affected, what causes what you're affected, and you can't articulate that to the professors, the doctors, whoever it is you're under, they are going to want to fully understand that before they're happy to let you go. I'm not saying they would be unwilling, but you would have to force the issue, because when I got the MRI results back, the doctor literally was about to go down the path of, okay, we've got it back, everything's clear, everything looks fine, all of your testing shows that it wasn't a stroke, you're completely okay, but when you got to A&E, you were in a bad way. We need to know what happened. And it was only the fact that I could articulate and explain the fact that I've got cancer, stage 1, I'm doing this protocol, and I'd figured out that the high-fat diet combined with the high dose of EGC combined with the high dose or higher dose, 160 milligrams a day of ivermectin, combined to produce a form of neurotoxicity that presented completely like a stroke. He basically made those notes in my file and said, okay, we'll send that off to the neurology team, get them to check it, see if that's a reasonable, feasible explanation for what happened. And if they're happy that, that's why what happened, we'll send you home. So essentially, after I got the MRI back, the following morning, spoke to the doctor, explained all that, got the answer from the neurological team in the afternoon. I was walking out of there at sort of 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So had I not had that full understanding and explanation available and ready, I probably would have been in hospital another maybe 3 or 4 days while they did various other tests to try and understand it. So having like a spreadsheet, maybe writing down what the potential side effects could be, and if you have any problems, and obviously if it affects your memory and people have to tell you about it afterwards, that was how I figured out exactly what went on, and I was able to work out all the timelines from talking with Claire and Sam and Bernardo and Luke about my behavior, how things had changed, how I wasn't me, and all of the rest of it. And I was able to piece together how quickly the onset was, how far back, how soon it had started, and why once I stopped taking everything went away so quickly. And so that level of understanding is what I would urge you to have in your research. So yeah, have backup in your partners, have backup systems, have ways of checking that you're okay. And then literally it's a case of, if you ever do go into hospital, just have things at the ready to help explain. If it's related to what you're taking, maybe you've got liver problems, kidney problems, maybe you're getting exhausted really quickly, maybe anemia, or maybe you've picked up colds or infections, maybe your immune system's affected, your white cell count's down. And if it's not to do with standard of care, which often that will be if you're chemotherapy, radiotherapy, or have just had surgery, you're vulnerable to anything that's out there. So any kinds of, flus or C words from China, anything like that, you're far more susceptible to. But if it's anything to do with what you're taking, just have that information available, and then you can present it all to the doctors, nurses, your professors, and at least speed things up. And that way it can save you a lot more time and effectively a waste of NHS resources, because I still don't know why my MRI took 4 days after the CT scan for them to be able to get me down there. I think it was because I was low priority, because I was 100% on every test that they gave me. But yeah, just when you're dealing with the NHS, if you're doing metabolic therapy protocol, they can't stop you. It's your choice, it's your health. If you're your own health advocate, as I am, just explaining people what you're doing, why you think it'll work, and all the research that you've done can make a massive difference. So I would say, just have that in mind. So if you are interested in helping me out to spread this message, please do like this video if you've got any value from it, subscribe to my channel, and if you've got any questions, please do comment below. I will try and answer every question that I get. I do check back on the videos from time to time and go through the comments just to make sure. And if you want to ask questions in a more real-time way, go to school.com with a K /Cancer Warriors, and you can go to metabolictherapy.com to read more about Professor Seafried, a little bit about the wider implications of metabolic therapy, and we've started putting our research up on there for the supplements. More is going to be coming on that soon. If you want to help me personally, if you like what I'm doing, what I'm sharing, I do have a GoFundMe. I don't have all of the finances and funding available for a full metabolic therapy protocol, which I would like to try if needed. Obviously, I've got another exam next week, but with the protocol that I've been doing, I'm hopeful that there's been some improvement, but I do not expect the cancer to be gone. And there are more things that I could be doing with the finances. And so I have a GoFundMe. The link's in the description below. Anything that you can donate will be massively appreciated and a huge help, and ultimately is helping to save my life. And I don't say that lightly. I mean, literally, if I were to not do the sort of the Barbie bum operation that I talked about in the last video, and I wasn't doing all of this metabolic therapy, the cancer would grow quickly, it would metastasize, it would potentially affect other organs. It may be a year or two before it massively starts to impact my health, i.e. the stage 3, the stage 4. But it's been a year since my first diagnosis anyway, and it's only a small tumour at the moment. So in a year since original diagnosis, to still be just a small tumour. What I'm doing costs quite a lot of money, and the diet that I'm doing isn't easy, and not everybody can stick to it possibly as well as I have done. But it does seem to be slowing things down. It's stopping the progression at the speed that you might normally see it. So I'm just trying to make improvements on that, such that we tip the scales from things just growing slowly to maybe not growing at all to shrinking slowly. If I can get to the shrinking slowly stage, which is hopefully where I'm at, I'll find out in a few weeks' time. I mean, I have the exam in just over a week, but the follow-up appointment for the results won't be until a couple of weeks after that. And I will make a video about that to say what happened, where I am, how things are going. But yeah, in the meantime, if you want to help me with my protocol, like I say, I've got a GoFundMe running. You can get the details from the description below. I really, really would appreciate any donations that anybody can make, because it will make a massive difference to what I can potentially add to my protocol. And yeah, I'd say just take it all on board, try and make notes, have things available, have a partner, use pill pots, use friends and family and co-workers to keep an eye on you. Don't do it alone. And yeah, I think I'll leave that there. So thank you very much for watching. This has gone on a little bit longer than I'd intended, but I hope you got some value out of it, and I will see you in the next update, which will probably be the final update in this mini series before I start moving on to slightly more educational stuff about the actual supplements and off labels. So I'll probably switch to more the educational side, and I'll try and give you. I'll probably do like a demo of how I do things so that you can try and replicate that, and maybe that's something that I'll help you sort of figure out how to do the research and get you into the school group and the metabolic therapy and everything else. So yeah, I'll leave that there. Thank you very much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see you in the next and final part of this series. So until then, take care and goodbye for now.